right, welcome everyone to this ArchivesSpace training on the ArchivesSpace Assessments module. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Coordinator for ArchivesSpace, and I'm joined today by Brittany Newberry of Georgia State. During this workshop, Brittany is going to cover using the assessments module in ArchivesSpace, including how to complete assessments in ArchivesSpace, adding values to the assessments template, and importing assessments using CSV. I will mention that attendees are expected to have experience with ArchivesSpace or to have completed an ArchivesSpace Basics training to participate in this training. Specifically, this training is going to assume that you understand the basics of record creation in ArchivesSpace and have experience creating material descriptive records like accession records, resource records, or digital object records. If you don't have this experience, you're welcome to stick around. You may just be a little lost. And then I recommend going back and reviewing one of the recordings of our basics training that you can find on our webpage or on our YouTube channel. And those links are provided in your agenda. This is the first time that this particular training has been offered in a virtual format, so please be patient as we do our best to transition this training to online. Traditionally, this is scheduled as a 2-hour in-person training. We've padded some extra time to account for the weirdness of virtual training, but we may find ourselves getting ahead or behind of schedule. Don't worry, we'll catch up. In advance of the training, you received an email with an agenda for the workshop with links to all of the materials you will need to participate in the workshop. Those materials are for participants of the live workshop only. So if you're listening to the recording of this workshop in the future, that does not apply. I am going to go ahead, if you didn't get that email or you're having trouble finding it, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link right now to the Google Drive that has all of that content. So you should be seeing the agenda on your screen right now. That agenda is included in this Google Drive. And if you look here, in addition to the agenda, you also have your assessments workbook. The workbook is supplemental in a lot of ways. We're not going to be following along page by page. So don't feel like you need to have printed that out or have it open to follow along, but save it somewhere handy so that you can reference it later. It's also where your exercises are going to be for the training. So when we mention exercises, we'll reference a page in the workbook, and that's where you'll find that. Like I said, you can also find a copy of the agenda. And you also find here this spreadsheet that says workshop machine assignments. This is really important, so I'm going to spend a second talking about it. This is where you can find the individual test instances for ArchivesSpace. You each have your own individual test instance for this workshop. This will be available to you through the end of the week. They do go down at night, so night Eastern time on the East Coast in the US. So if you're doing some midnight homework or working outside of normal business hours on the East Coast, they may be down. If that's the case, just switch on over to our sandbox and use the sandbox if you're still playing around. Or, you know, you don't have time to look at this until after Friday, please feel free to go look at the sandbox. But for the purposes of the training today, you each have your own individual test instance. So find your name, copy and paste that link, and the username and password to access it are admin and admin. That will give you full administrative permissions within that particular sandbox. So even if you don't have admin access at your own institution and your archive space at your institution, you will for the purposes of this workshop and for the exercises. Please be extra careful. Make sure you are copying or clicking your link. Please don't use someone else's. You don't want to work on top of each other, and please don't use the instructor instance. If you have any questions or having issue with that, just send me a message and we'll troubleshoot it together. And then finally, there's a copy of the ArchivesSpace Assessments Import CSV. Brittany's going to be talking about that towards the end of our time together today, but that's just a copy for you to have later in case you want to import your assessments. And then let's switch back over to the agenda. So the agenda, hopefully you've already seen it. Like I said, we may not be holding exactly to these times on the agenda, but please keep in mind that we will cover all of this content. We will be doing exercises throughout the session. So sometimes we might take a break while we're doing the exercises. Feel free to step away when you need to, or if you'd rather just follow along for the exercises, you're more than welcome to do that. And then down at the very bottom of your agenda, we have some post-workshop resources, a lot of handy links that you are welcome to use. We may reference them throughout the training. You know, you'll definitely hear us say, oh, the Getting Started webpage, so that's there. Check out Awesome Archive Space. You can find all of those links there. And then also there is a workshop evaluation. Please complete that evaluation. This training is the final training that is part of a larger community training assessment. We've been offering trainings over the past 12 months. I know a lot of you have been in those trainings, so it's really exciting to see people coming back for more. And the ArchivesSpace Trainers Corps that Brittany and I are both a part of are going to be using these assessments or these evaluations to determine the level of interest in continuing to offer trainings like these. So if you would like to see more trainings offered in the future, please take a moment to fill out that evaluation. Otherwise, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I will mention, and Brittany may mention as well, we are using the latest version of ArchivesSpace for this training, which is version 3.2. If you're using an earlier version of ArchivesSpace, keep in mind that some of the features that you're seeing today may not be available to you at your institution. And if you are having trouble with your own individual implementations at your institution, we're not going to be able to troubleshoot those live today, but feel free to send us an email at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, Brittany, and I will turn things over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm just gonna share my screen first. So, as Jessica said, I'm Brittany Newberry. I am currently the Popular Music and Culture Archivist at Georgia State University in Atlanta. Previously, and not that long ago, I was a processing archivist at the Atlanta University Center, also in Atlanta. And there is where I did most of my ArchivesSpace work. I was responsible for managing the ArchivesSpace instance in the archives, doing training, writing manuals, creating workflows, and various other things. And one of the workflows I created was how we would use the assessment module in ArchivesSpace. So I am a former chair of the ArchivesSpace User Advisory Council, and I am an ArchivesSpace trainer. So I have a little experience with ArchivesSpace, I guess. But I am looking forward to doing this training with you guys, and feel free to put questions in the Q&A as we go along. So what I want to go over first is what is an assessment record, what is this module, and how it could potentially benefit you at your institution. So in your workbook, you'll find text in the beginning that gives an overview of what assessment module is, and it's basically doing a collection assessment is a systematic, purposeful gathering of information about the physical content, condition, and potential prioritization of archival collection. This assessment is a critical collections management function that provides archivists and senior management with valuable quantitative information about institution's backlog and the conditions of its holding. So this resulting data can provide statistical evidence needed to identify critical needs, prioritize your work, and measure progress. It can also assist you in making informed decisions about how to most effectively allocate dwindling resources and provide them with valuable quantitative data to present to donors, trustees, funders, your administration, whatever you need it for. So the assessments module was developed as a part of ArchivesSpace through Tufts. So they developed it in 2017, and they worked off of what was developed for the Archivist Toolkit by the Philadelphia Area Consortium of Special Collection Libraries. So we're very appreciative that the ArchivesSpace community developed this module, and we are able to use it. So I want to point out that the goals of assessments are to provide information on the content and condition of individual collections. May they be single item collections, photographs, large collections, your accessions, that kind of thing. Provide an informed view of the overall state of a repository's holding, potentially discovering or confirming strengths and weaknesses, different collecting areas, large amounts of audio visual, that kind of thing. And it helps you to generate data, which can be used to inform the development of institutional priorities. But it will not eliminate your backlog. It can help you identify what's in there and what should be prioritized, but it will not get rid of it. It will not solve your preservation or conservation needs or problems. It can be incorporated with accessioning and processing on at least a day forward basis or on a project basis. So when I was at the AUC, we started using assessment records in order to identify the conditions and the priorities for our incoming accessions. And so they would be associated with our accession records and allow us to identify priorities for that. So that is basically an overview of what they are, what they can do and can't do. And so now I'm going to talk about how you create an assessment record and go over the basic requirements. So to create an assessment record, you can do so from the Create menu. So you can go to Create, drop down, and click on Assessment.
Brittany.
And that will open up.
Brittany.
Yes.
Can you blow up your screen a little bit?
Oh, I can. Is that better?
Good. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm dealing with a screen that I'm not used to, but that is a long tangent. So this is a blank assessment record. If you go to Create and then click on Assessment, it will allow you to just open a blank one and then choose the record. We'll go over what kinds of records in a moment. You can also create from the browse. If you want to look at the assessments that have been created, you can click on the Browse menu and go to Assessments. We have none, but from here, you can click Create Assessment and create a new assessment record. You can also do it from a record that you want to link an assessment record to. So say you have an accession record that you just created, the Jane Doe papers here. You can go into that record, go to More, and then click Create Assessment. So all of you in your workshop instances will have the ability to do this. But I want to point out that you must have permission. So you must be in the right permission group or right permission level to create assessments in your repository or your ArchivesSpace implementation. So just remember that. If you don't want students creating assessment records, don't have that permission granted to them. But from here, if you click More and click Create Assessment, it will open a new assessment, but will have the linked record in the records field. So that way, when you save this, it will be linked to the Jane Doe paper, and you're not having to search for it through here. So I'm going to show you from the Create menu, just so you see how to find records. So when you start with a new assessment record, the first required field of an assessment record is the record that it's going to be associated with. So it links to either resource, accession, archival object, or digital object. So even in your collection records, the resource records, those finding aids, if you have an archival object that you want to create an assessment for, say it's an obsolete media format and you want to make sure you've created an assessment for it, you can do that. You can specifically choose that individual file, that series, that subseries, and create a assessment record for it. And these become the subject of this assessment. So you can type ahead and it will show you all the ones associated with what you're typing. And you can browse. You can't create records from assessment records. The record has to be already created for you to link an assessment record to it. When you browse, it will show the different record types that you can associate it with. So it will show all the archival objects, digital objects, resource, and accession records in this repository. And then you're able to filter the text and then choose different record types that you want to look at, the creator and the subject here on the side. And then once you've chosen it, you can link to records. So once you have chosen your record, and I must say this is an update, I really like the different colors to the linked record here. So this must be new with 3.2. So once you've chosen that, the only other required fields are the surveyed by and the surveyed begin date. And when you're scrolling over, similar to other records, you'll see those tooltips and it will tell you what's required in this. Surveyed by is the users in your repository. So if you have a user record, you can survey this collection. So you can type a head here. I added myself as a user, and you can choose your name. If if it's like a general group, like an intern or something, you can have that. So there's an administrator. So this is all the users in your repository. They technically get records and they can be a part of this. And that's how you decide. So you can type ahead or you can browse. You can't create users. They have to already be created when you're doing assessment records. But you can exit out of this and go create a user if you need to. And then the survey begin date, I'm going to add myself to this. The survey begin date is when you began this assessment. It doesn't have to be this today. You can go back in time, say you started this in paper form, say you have an assessment form that you like to have written out, and you started that like last week, and this is technically just you making a digital version of it, you can choose that. But it defaults to the day that you started creating the record. And then survey completed day and all that is not required, and I will go over that in a moment. But once you have created or added the required fields, you just click Save Assessment, and it will go ahead and create this assessment. When you start creating assessments, they start getting numbered. They aren't assessment, Jane Doe papers, assessment, Jane Doe accession, they're not that. Their names are assessment 1, assessment 2, assessment 3. So they get numbered as you start creating them. And as you browse them through the browse list, you'll see them in number order, and you can change how this looks, but it will in the browse list show you the record is associated with and the type of record and who is a surveyor of that. And then there's other columns you can add via preferences, and I recommend looking into those if you want more columns in this browse list. And then assessment completed refers to when it was completed if you fill out the survey completed field, which I'll show you here in a moment. So we're going to go back into this and go back into edit mode. Actually, I think it's time for exercise 1. Or is it I go over everything? Jessica, if you don't mind letting me know.
You go ahead and go over everything, and then our first exercise is scheduled for 1 o'clock.
Okay, cool. So we have plenty of time, guys.
Yeah, you got time.
Okay, so I'm going to go into edit mode of this assessment we've already created, and then we're going to go over everything else you can add to an assessment out of the box. So we've already linked our record. We linked an accession record for the Jane Doe papers. I want to open this and show you why I want to do an assessment of it. So let me spell today. So we're going to view this accession record. So we see we got this accession back in 2015. So it hasn't been processed. We just have the material. In content description, we see that it has correspondence, research materials, diaries, photograph, audiovisual, scrapbooks, and printed material. But then we get into condition description, and this talks about how there are the basic preservation concerns, your rusted staples and paper clips, but there's also obsolete media formats such as audio cassettes, reel-to-reels, LPs, so your vinyl records, and VHS tapes. It also contains photographs that will need to be preserved, so standard preservation for those, depending on your institution. And then we see that the scrapbooks have water damage, there's glue, there's tape, and they may have mold. And the printed materials are oversized and includes maps, and they need to be put in appropriate housing. So when you're doing an assessment, you can get the information that you need in order to create the record by viewing the collection from the accession record itself, if you fill out the condition description, basically from the information you know about this collection. So it's really up to you at your institution how you decide to create these assessment records. I'm usually looking at the collection, or I did the accession record and I know what's in it, but you can always edit the assessment record. You can always add another assessment record. So it's just basically what you decide at your institution. So we're going to do an assessment record based on this accession record and what we know about the condition since 2015. So we're going to go back to our assessment. We're going to edit it. So based on the accession record, we know that there is an accession report. So existing description is what description do we have already about this collection, this accession, this digital object, this item. We know that based on my information about my institution, we got a gift and we created a collection control file, but we don't have anything else. There's no finding aid. There's no mark record, we don't have a container list, and we don't have an appraisal. But if you do have that information, you can check these boxes and add it. So you create an EAD encoding finding aid. If you have a Word document as your finding aid, if the finding aid is published on ArchivesSpace or online, you can check that box here. If you just have a printout, that kind of thing. So this allows you to identify what existing description you have for this record you're doing an assessment on. And then if you want to get more in depth about it, you can add existing description notes. So this allows you to add more context about the description that you have already, and anything you want someone who's looking at this record to know, or you want to like make sure is remembered about it. So you can add that here. And then you'll go into the surveyed area of the record. So here we just added surveyed by and survey begin date, but you also can add survey completed date. So you filled out this complete assessment record and you want to make sure that it shows that it's been completed so someone doesn't think that they need to work on this assessment record or ask if it's been done. Like, so they know who surveyed it, so they can go and reach out to them and be like, did you complete this, if there's no completed date? But it's not required, but you can potentially make an institutional policy to have an end date. So if you completed the same day you created it, good, but if it takes you a little while, you can go and update that. And all of the dates follow the DAX format of year, month, day. So you can type in here or you can choose from the calendar. And then you have the time it took to complete the survey. This is the hours it took to complete this, and you can add that to this field here. So it is measured in hour increments, so keep that in mind. And then the next section of this is extent survey. So this is the size of the collection that you surveyed. Because assessments don't have to be the whole collection, it can be parts. So just a series or the digital objects or scrapbooks, whatever you choose to survey as a part of this assessment. So here you would describe that. So you can say that you only did 5 linear feet of the collection. So this is when you do only a portion of it. Or even if you did the whole, you can add that here as well. It's really up to you. But that field is available to you. And after that is reviewed required. So this is if the assessment needs to be reviewed by a supervisor, by the department head, who's ever in charge of collections. So this way you can identify that. You can check this box here. And then this is whoever is in the user records. So say the administrator needs a review, and you can add a review note saying you've filled out all fields that you are responsible for, and there are certain fields they need to review and fill out, whatever it may be. So you can add that to this assessment. There's also the area where you can identify the purpose of the assessment and the scope of the assessment. So is the purpose to identify all audiovisual materials and their current conservation needs, their preservation needs, and the amount of time and resources it would take. You can add that here. And for the scope, you can add the series, the type of material, so it's audiovisual or if it's scrapbook, all the photographs, that kind of thing. You can add that here, and the tool tip gives you examples of what you can add into the scope field. And then there's a box for sensitive materials. Say there's personal identifying information, there's confidential materials in the collection. This is where you would check that box, and it would identify, it would note that there are sensitive materials. And then for inactive, if this assessment record is no longer correct, like if everything, like say it was audiovisual and all of them have been preserved and you've dealt with the issues, you can go in and say that is inactive, so it no longer appears in searches or reports. And we'll get into the reports later, but there is assessment reports that will give you lists and give you the active one. So this way you can say this assessment is no longer needed, but if you want it for reporting, for historical purposes, for archives, for records management, you can keep it. And this way you don't have to delete an assessment. You can just mark it as inactive. So that is all of that. And now we get into the meat of the assessment record. This is part of that is the assessment information area. So we have the general assessment note, and this is any notes you need to add. Just like general note in your resource, your accession records, this is really whatever you want to use it for to provide information about this assessment. So you'll see below that you have these various areas where you are providing a rating. These are not required, and it's up to you as at your institution to decide what is significant to you when making assessment records and doing assessments on collections. So, and you can always leave these at no rating. So as I've said before, the only things that are required to save an assessment record are the linked record surveyed by the person who surveys it and the date that the survey began. So here you have various ones, and then you see that you can add additional ones. And we'll get into adding these additional ratings later on. So the first one is documentation quality. So this refers to the richness and depth of the documentation available in a collection. So it's usually used in conjunction with interest in the materials, and those two scores based on this module equal your research value score. So it's really how valuable are these materials to our researchers, and what will they get out of these materials for the research and scholarship they are working on. And then housing quality refers to the housing of the materials. So it's that physical housing. It's like if it has, if it came in the liquor boxes and you need to get them out, and you're doing this assessment upon acquisition and you haven't transferred it to record storage boxes, your document boxes, your Hollinger boxes, that kind of thing. This rating here, that type of housing. And as you can see, for all the ratings, you have a 1 to 5, and you determine what 1 and 5 means. Like 1 can mean poor and 5 can mean excellent, that kind of thing. And it can depend on each type of rating. And then the next is intellectual access. And this is about description. and the description about the collection. So do you have a finding aid? Does it have a well done accession record that you can make public, and so people can view it and decide if this is something they want to use in their research or to view in the reading room. So that's what this is referring to, what types of description you have created for this collection and is available to researchers. Interest, as I said, is usually used in conjunction with documentation quality, and it refers to the interests of your donors, the community, the researchers, your users. How much interest have they shown in it? And is it something they're very interested in and should be placed in high priority, or is it something that's they're not very interested in, and we can wait a while to process it. So this plus documentation quality equals that research value based on this module, but you don't have to use it for that. That's just what is provided here. You can change out tool tips in your config file, and that's like a backend thing. So if you want to change what these mean, I would recommend looking into that. And then, so sometimes you may not know the interests of your collection. Like at the AUC, we weren't sure the exact interest in things, and we would determine interest by publishing accession records and seeing if people were requesting them. And that would help us to gauge interest in them. If people are reaching out about things that aren't processed, it's showing that they're interested in them and we need to process them. So that's a way to determine that rating, but it's totally up to you at your institution how you do so. And next is physical access. So this one has a larger tooltip, and this is about the arrangement of the collection. And usually it depends on how you're doing the assessment. This refers to like, is the original order, does it make sense? Is it something we can keep and just use and so people can access it now? Or is it something that we can't even determine the order and we need to process and create the order in order for people to be able to access it? So it refers to that type of arrangement. And so it's all about that physical access to it, not the intellectual, which is the finding aid or the description you have created. And then there's physical condition, and that refers to the physical condition of the materials in it and if they need conservation or preservation efforts. And you can note this later on in the assessment, what conservation is needed. And then there's reformatting readiness. And this refers to your audiovisual, your various other materials that may need to be reformatted into other formats in order to make them accessible. Is it something that can easily be done, like a floppy disk transferred onto a computer in order to do some digital preservation work on it? And that you can rate here based on what is in the collection. It may not be something you need to rate, so you can pick and choose which one of these assessment ratings areas you want to use. And as you're doing so, you'll see that you have the option to add a note. And so if you want to clarify why you rated documentation quality at a 3, you can do that in this note. So that way you can, so people who are looking at this record know why, oh, it's okay, it's fair documentation quality because of this. So based on the accession record that we're doing, the Jane Doe papers, I know that it has audio-visual material that could be reformatted kind of easily, kind of not. So I'm going to put that as a 3. I know that it needs preservation, like it needs it. So I'm going to put a 2. And the physical arrangement, I'm not sure about based on the accession record. And intellectual access, kind of there, kind of not. So we'll do an in between. And then housing quality, it definitely needs it because there's oversized materials that need housing, that kind of thing. And then documentation quality. I'm not sure if people are interested in Jane Doe. And I'm not, it says it's about the life and career of Jane Doe, but I'm not certain if people are interested. I'm not sure of the interest of this at all. So I'll leave those as no rating. And for like reformatting readiness, I'll note that there are audiovisual materials, VHS tapes, and reel to reel that can be reformatted. And we have the equipment to do such. So if you at your institution have the equipment to do such and you don't need to send it off, or if you have the budget or resources to send it off, you can note that in this note. So people are like, oh yeah, I remember that. Let's add this to our preservation list so we can have it sent off or have it in the queue to be reformatted and made available online. So we're going to keep that note. I'm going to save this assessment for now. Always save whenever possible, because if you walk away, ArchivesSpace will time out. I'm pretty sure all of you are aware of this, but save whenever possible. So we've completed the general assessment information section. So we've added ratings for few. We have a note. So now let's move on to the material type / format in this collection. So this area refers to the types that are in the records that you are assessing. So if it's just a series, you're only going to note the types or formats in that series. If it's just in one file, only in that file. If the whole collection, you want to note all that are in that collection. If you're doing all linear feet, all cubic feet of the collection. So we know that we're doing the noting what's in this this old acquisition, and we want to make sure of that. So we're going to say you see that there's various ones listed here. We have architectural materials, so those blueprints and various other things you can have in those types of materials. There's art originals, artifacts, audio materials, which we know we have, because we have audio cassettes. There's biological specimens and botanical specimens. Not sure if me personally would want either in my collections, but there are archives who keep that type of materials, and they may want to note them in their assessment records, and this is a way to do so. There's computer storage units, which generally refers to you have a hard drive, a flash drive, you have a whole computer, you have files, born digital records, that kind of thing, and you can note that here. If this doesn't seem clear enough for you, you can add additional material types, and there is a specific format note, and you can note the types of like computer files or born digital things that you have in that note. There's also film, so you can note if there's negatives, there's slides or motion pictures. Glass, depending on if there's like frames or various other things. There's always those glass awards and various other things that could be glass, and you may want to note that because if they break, that could be harmful. There's photographs, scrapbooks, which we know we have both of those in this collection, technical drawings and some schematics, similar blueprints, that kind of thing. Textiles like clothing, purses, different fabrics, that kind of thing if you collect them. Vellum and parchment, referring to those rare books that you may have, those older ones, and you're doing an assessment on them. You can note that, or even older types of paper that may be in very old collections and that's written on. You can note that here, and you can of course add additional ones so people who may not be as familiar with the terms that are used in this list can know which ones the appropriate ones to check based on you just adding additional ones or having them fill out the special format note. So, and then we're going to choose video materials. If none of these work And if you don't have the ability to add additional material types, because that is a permission level, you can choose other. There's always other, and you can add information about why you chose other in the special format note. So if you need to do so, you can note that here. There's also the exhibition value note, and that refers to the exhibit value of the materials. Are they neat photographs, cool scrapbooks, newspaper clippings? Are there artifacts and various things that you think would look good in exhibits in the future? You can note that here. If you think it would be something that you could loan to another institution for them to use an exhibit, you can also note that here. So it's really you decide what you want to put in that, but it's available to you to add that. There's also a monetary value note. So if you have your collections appraised for monetary value, you can add that here. And you can, so this is the amount, the value of it, and then a note about the value. So if you do appraisals with monetary values, you can note that in this assessment. You can even say where it's located. Like if there's a report somewhere on your server, you can say that it's on the J drive and you need to, that's where you can access it, or it's in your SharePoint, so people can view that and understand the monetary value of the collection, if that's something that's required by a donor or your institution. So that is the material types and formats. And next up is conservation issues. So this is those preservation issues that you have in your collection, or the series, the item that you are creating an assessment for. Like the list, the types and formats and the assessment information, you have the ability to add additional ones, and that will be later on. So we'll discuss that later on. So the out of the box ones, we have brittle paper. So say this collection is old and has that onion skin, or if the paper is just from the early 20th, 19th, even 18th century, and it's just falling apart and you want to make note of that, you can do so. Deteriorating film base, depending on the type of film, it may be deteriorating. Heat sensitive paper, which there's always fire can always cause damage to most paper, but if you have like specific paper types that you want to note, you can do such here. Metal fasteners, that's usually a given that most collections will have those staples, the paper clips that need to be removed. There's even the ability to select newspapers. So if you have large boxes of newspaper clippings, you know there's a lot of printed materials, you can check this box. Potential mold or mold damage. Recent pest damage, you can note that here if you know that where it was stored, there were a lot of mice, rats, various bugs in that garage, basement, even the house overall. You can note, you can check this box if you know that's caused damage. If there's tape or water damage, you can note those too. So we chose several of these based on what we know about the accession record, which is there's scrapbooks, which could have brittle paper, metal fasteners, mold because of the scrapbooks and they have water damage, and tape. If you want to be more specific about the conservation, say based on the assessment information section up here, where you noted the physical condition and you want to make more note of that based on your rating, this is where you can add more information as well. So in this conservation note, if you want to make note of scrapbooks having water damage and such, you can add that here. Glue and mold. And then if you want to note any other conservation issues, such as the need to preserve audio visual materials, you can add that to this note. So it's really up to you what you add here, but it is a free text field that is available to you. And similar to list of types and formats, you may think, oh, I already noted audio and video materials and types of format, but you can note here the types of conservation issues you have with them. So it just allows you to add more information about it. And then once you have done finish filling out the conservation information, those issues, you do have the ability to add an external document. Say you created a different rating form for this and you just want to link it here, you can do so. And this just requires a title and location. Location can be a URI, or it can be the path to your server, or it can be just typed information, like you can find it on SharePoint, that kind of thing. So you can link external documents. You can link to your appraisal report here, anything, your environmental scan of materials if you have one of those. If you have a grant that you're working to preserve these materials with, you can add that here and link to it. So that way it's associated with the record and you know the collection it's associated with and you have all that information together. And then you can choose whether or not to publish external documents, but that's up to you. Assessment records don't get published with the record. It's just associated with it on the staff side of ArchivesSpace. So we're going to X out this so we can save the record. And we have created an assessment record for the Jane Doe papers accession. So that is an overview of creating an assessment record. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Brittany. Great timing. All right, we do have a couple questions, so let's go ahead and dive into those. The first question, Carol asks, if you survey a portion of the collection and then you later do the rest, would you update the existing assessment or create a new one? That's a good question, Carol, and like any good archival question, the answer is it depends. But Brittany, do you want to answer, or I can take a stab at it?
So it does depend. So if you did a portion and now you're doing the whole, you can create a new one that's for the whole record, especially if that portion was very specific. And the one for the collection is just so you can have the general assessment of that collection. So that way you have both and it will be linked to each record. And you will know specific information and then just general about its condition. But you can always update the other one and change it. If I'm correct, you can't do multiple, right?
You can have multiple assessments attached, and you can so you can have multiple assessments attached to a record, and you can also have a single assessment attached to multiple accessions.
Yes.
I will say that at the beginning of the workbook, there are some. This is not really part of the training, but there are some policy considerations listed at the beginning of the workbook. I would definitely recommend for something like the assessments module, if you decide you want to move forward with using the assessments module, take some time and think it through. If there are other stakeholders at your institution, get them involved, because there's a lot of different ways that you can manage assessments in ArchivesSpace, and none of them are wrong. I mean, I'm sure there is a wrong way to do it. But there are several different ways you could go about it that are perfectly fine. You just want to make sure everyone is on the same page. So while it is possible to go back to an assessment and edit it later and add to it later, think about whether or not you want to do that. What would be lost by going in and adding that information? Would you be changing dates? Would that impact the sort of reporting information you want? That sort of thing. So it may be better in the long run to have a new assessment and maybe mark the old one as inactive or something like that. Or it might just be easier to have one assessment for you. So that's something to consider.
Yes.
And Brittany is going to get into that a little bit more when we talk about managing assessments. And exercise 2 specifically sort of has you think about those things in a larger context. Sarah asks, can you edit the existing material types? So you cannot edit the existing material types. They are there, but you can add up to 10 additional material types. And Brittany will show us how to do that in just a little bit. But those material types that are there, you cannot edit the text for those. Now, let's say that like Brittany doesn't want them, but maybe you're an herbarium and you have a lot of botanical specimens and botanical specimens isn't specific enough for your needs. You could add 10 different examples of different botanical types that you could, so you can expound on the material types, but you can't change the ones that are already there. And I'm stepping on Brittany's toes here, but those 10 additional material types that you add are also repository specific. So maybe your repository is the herbarium and no one else has any botanical specimens. You wouldn't be taking it's not limited to 10 per entire ArchivesSpace implementation. It's 10 per repository that you can add of additional material types.
Yeah, so your assessments are the assessments and their attributes and all these like lists are associated with the repository, and because it's based on the records you have in that repository. So you don't do repository wide records like subjects and agents. You can't add assessments to records to them.
Right. And so, well, no, I'm getting ahead. I know Brittany's going to cover it, so I'm not even going to, we'll move on because we'll get to it later. And then another question, is it possible to link assessments and event records? So Brittany kind of just answered that. Things like assessment records, event records, subject records, agent records, those records that you link to the material descriptive records, which are your resource, accession, and digital object records, they're meant to be additive to those material descriptive records. They don't link to each other. They're about the collection information that's included in those accession, resource, and digital object records.
But you can create an event and saying that you did the assessment.
You can do that,
yeah. If that's something that your institution does where you want people to know, oh, this happened, you can do that. But it doesn't provide a ton of information like the assessment record does. So. Do we have any other questions?
Sreet's question was the one about events and assessments. Yeah, so you can always, like Brittany said, you can always indicate that an assessment was done as an event. An event really wouldn't be an assessment, though. Like you wouldn't create an assessment for like a processing event. That's not something you would do.
No.
All right. No other questions are popping up in the chat, and we're really right on schedule, so that's cool. Brittany, are you ready to move into the exercise, or is there anything else you want to add before I start talking about exercises?
We can move into the exercise.
Sounds good. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start with exercise 1. That's on page 21 of your workbook. We have allotted 30 minutes to do the exercise. I think what we'll do is for the first 15 minutes, we'll just be quietly here, and you know, you can take that time to work on the exercise, to go grab a cup of coffee, run to the bathroom, whatever you need to do, and then after about 15 minutes, Brittany and I will come back on and be available for questions or discussion to talk about the exercise, and then we'll dive into managing assessment records at 30 minutes after the hour. So that first exercise, like I said, that's on page 21 of your workbook, and it provides you with a rough outline of an accession for a collection, and the exercise is asking you to create two things here: create a rough accession record, and then create an assessment record for that new accession. So some things to consider there are, what do you want to include in the assessment record versus what do you want to include in the assessment record? how detailed you want to be in the accession versus the assessment, and think things through that way. So go ahead and let's get started on that exercise. Like I said, that's page 21 of your workbook, and please use your workshop test instance that's provided, or you're welcome to use your implementation at your own organization, but go back and delete this stuff later. You definitely don't want to keep it there. But we'll go ahead and we'll give it about 15 minutes for everyone who wants to take a stab at it, and then in 15 minutes we'll come back and be available for questions and discussion. Thanks. All right, everyone. We are going to go ahead and come back on. We're not covering any new content yet. We're still going to take another 15 minutes for exercises, but this for the next 15 minutes, if you're working and have questions, please feel free, or if you've already done the exercise and have questions, please feel free to go ahead and start posting those questions in the Q&A now, and we'll have that discussion over the next 15 minutes before we move into managing assessment records. All right, so we've got a question in the Q&A. I am on my Accession record trying to add the assessment, and the Stump family papers is not appearing in my drop-down list. What could I maybe be doing wrong? Vivian Lee, have you saved the Accession record yet? I would say make sure you've saved the Accession record and that it's there in your browse window before creating the assessment. Brittany, any advice?
Yeah, and it may take a minute for it to appear as an option, depending. Yes, but in order to create an assessment, you have to have a record that's been saved and is actually in ArchivesSpace.
Yeah, I would say give it a second, like Brittany said, while things are indexing, since we have so many different implementations of ArchivesSpace running right now.
Yeah.
But if you are able to see it in your browse sessions, you should be able to, you can either go in and just create an assessment and then link to it, or you should be able to just go ahead and add that from the more dropdown.
Yeah.
But let us know, Vivian Lee, if it doesn't show up.
I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again.
Okay, that sounds good. Can I add a custom checkbox option for the existing description section? We have transfers for university archives, so we have transfer forms and receipts, not deeds of gift.
Based on what I know, no, that might be something you can work out at your institution and like a customization thing, but you can add information about things that may not exist in the existing description area in that existing description notes.
Yeah, what Brittany said, it's not possible to add, and Brittany will show in just a second how you can add additional like material types, but you're not able to do that for existing description. You could always just add an existing description note like she said, or maybe add via a plugin or some sort of customization, but it's not something that you're able to do through managing assessment attributes. Are the checkboxes for types and issues indexed for searching and or reporting? Yeah, so you can run reports, and we'll talk about canned reporting in just a minute, or not just a minute, we'll talk about canned reporting later. And then of course, there's also, if you're using ArchivesSpace 3.2, there is a custom reporting feature that I can talk about if we have time later. Do keep in mind that if you add additional material types or formats, those are repository specific. So if you are transferring an assessment or transferring a resource record or a session record that has an assessment attached, and there are additional material types that you have added within your repository, they will not transfer over. And of course, with reporting, you wouldn't be able to see across repository anyway.
No.
Okay, so Jennifer, what was the answer to the additional checkbox? Yeah, we'll talk about adding material types in just a second. That's a good question. Jennifer just asked a good question. For the ratings, how do you define them, or where do those definitions live?
Oh, that is great. They live in the tooltip that you see, also in the user manual if you have access to the ArchivesSpace Help Center. So if you scroll over the different ratings, it will give you this tooltip and explain to you. In previous iteration versions of ArchivesSpace, it would do it based on the number. So 1 would equal this, 2 would equal that kind of thing, depending on the type of rating. So if you're in older version, I don't know when it changed. I just know that when I created the manual for ours, it had that, and I copied that and added it to the manual. So people wouldn't have, so they would know what they were rating and what it meant. So it's in this. It's also can be found in the ArchivesSpace Help Center in the assessments section. And then I would say you can also determine it yourself. If you aren't using these ratings, and especially if you're adding additional ones, you're not going to be able to have that scroll over when you're adding additional ones. You'll want to make sure in your policies and procedures you have added what those mean and how you rate them. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah. ArchivesSpace itself, when working in the assessment module, does assume 1 is the worst and 5 is the best. However you want to define that can be up to you, but it just like when you're thinking about ArchivesSpace and how ArchivesSpace thinks about these things, 1 is bad, 5 is good.
Yeah. And then if you click on like these question marks, it will tell you what that means based on each rating. And I forgot to click on it when we were going through it. So when it comes to documentation quality, 5 is very rich documentation. It's great. The quality is excellent. But when you click on something like physical access, it tells you, oh, well, 1 is not totally unarranged, but it's kind of like just haphazard. Then 5, it's full arrangement. Like this is already processed by the donor. So you're able to click on those. And I highly recommend just copying that into a manual. So you have it available and can share it with whoever's creating assessment records.
Yeah. And like Brittany said, however you want to define this at your institution, it really just goes back to making sure you have a good policy and good documentation in place to start.
Yes.
Is it possible to add a custom rating field? Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, under additional ratings, and I'll get more into that.
Time took to complete survey does not have a required format style. Yeah, you can define that however you need to. I mean, if you're timing yourself and want to put, it took me 5 minutes to complete this record, you can do that. Or some people may need to indicate that the assessment happened over the span of weeks or months. So however you need to record that information.
Yeah.
Thank you. Brianna just dropped into the chat a minute ago, a link directly to the ArchivesSpace Help Center for the assessments module. So if you are from an ArchivesSpace member institution and have access to the Help Center, that page will drop you right into the user manual. You may need to log in, so don't be surprised if you are asked to log in there.
Yes. And there are user tutorial videos on how to use various aspects of assessment records.
All right, so we're going to give it another 4 minutes because that's what we said we would do. And I know people might not actually be at their computers. They might have had to have stepped away. So we will move on to managing assessments in a few minutes. But in the meantime, please continue to drop your questions into the Q&A. Vivian Lee, we'll go over how to add material types and formats in just a second. But again, if you're creating a record or adding material type and then immediately trying to add it, it may just be an indexing issue.
Yes.
All right. It's about that time. We're not getting any other questions in the chat. So let's go ahead and Brittany, if you're ready, let's go ahead and move on to managing assessments. So we'll talk about that for about a half hour before we move into exercise 2. So if you're ready, Brittany, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so like I said, we're going to talk about managing assessments and specifically managing assessment attributes. So before you even start creating assessments, you might want to consider whether or not, well, they work for your institution, if you have the ability and time to do so. And you may want to review a blank assessment record and look at all the areas where you have the ability to add additional ratings. So whenever you're in this and you have the right permissions, if you're able to add additional ratings, you will be able to click on the manage additional ratings for this repository. It is repository specific. and you can click on it and it will take you into the a different screen to do that, and we'll do that in a moment. But as you're like reviewing the out of the box ratings, types and formats, conservation issues, you may notice ones that aren't there and you want to add, and you notice a lot in your collections and you want to make sure those are noted and you have the check boxes for them, that kind of thing. So that's where managing assessment attributes come into it. So if you're doing it on the fly and you're already in an assessment record, you can do so using clicking on that underneath the additional ratings, or you can go to the gear menu, click on it, and go to Manage Assessment Attributes. Here we'll show all of the various ratings you have. So there's the ratings that you can do. There's the material types and formats. And then there are the repository material types and formats. Sorry, there's a conservation issues. And these are what is out of the box. And then you have the green plus button that you can click on to add more. So with each, you have the database value and what it translates to. So you could type something in database value and it say something else in the translation. But these are just one-to-one. I want to point out that when you are creating ratings, you see that here you have research value. In order to get that in an assessment, you have to fill out both interest and documentation quality, and then it will show the value for research value, the rating for research value. And that's why it's not one you can just choose. But if you want to make sure you just have it as an option, you can create it so that way you can just determine it without having to. I cannot spell today. You can determine what the value of it for researchers is without having to do that whole interest plus documentation quality. And as you're adding, you can decide, oh, I don't want it, and click the X and decide to add something else. You can add up to 10 for each, and that is all you're allowed. So if you determine at some point that one hasn't been used and you need to add another rating and you're out of them, you can delete the one that's not been used so that you can add another. So for us at the AUC, we added one called donor priority, because some collections, the processing priority is determined by the donor. Like they have an agreement that they will give money, but this collection has to be processed in 2 years and that kind of thing. And we want to note that in this assessment so we know this collection is next up on our processing plan. And then you can add various ones based on your institution and what you have seen and what you want to rate. So as you add, you will continue to click the green button. And once you're done adding, you just click Save Assessment Attributes. It will update them. And you will see that the repository ones are below this. And it doesn't have a database value or translation. It's just this. And it doesn't have that ability to translate or whatever, but you can make note in your policies and procedure what these mean to you as a repository and what the ratings would mean, like what 1 to 5 means. So that's the ratings for assessments. And then there's material types and formats. So there are so many different types and formats that you could potentially have in a collection. And it really depends on your collecting areas, the type of institution you are, and what collections you bring into your institution. That's why the global ones try to cover as much as they can. I might not accept biological specimens, but there are others that do. So that's why it includes these. But there's always a case of not having it listed because of how many types and formats there are possible out there. And these may not be as specific as you want them to be. Maybe you have so many collections with specific things in them, you want to add that. You have the ability to add up to 10 more, just like the ratings. And you can say you have a lot of, personally, I have a lot of music collections, and they come with a lot of vinyl records, audio cassettes, that kind of thing. And audio materials isn't specific enough for me. So I want to make sure I have one, let's say 16-inch records or 16-inch LPs, that kind of thing. So I will add that to it. And then say that you want to make sure that general manuscript paper is there because your collections are just onion skin or something like that. You can say carbon paper. Can't spell that today either. Carbon copy paper. You can add one for onion skin if that's what you want to call it, that kind of thing. So it's really, again, up to you as an institution. This is to survey your collections, but it might be nice to meet with your department, meet with the people involved in doing this work, and determine what general types you have and what would be good to add to this list. So you make sure it's covered. You can always do it on the fly if you have the one available, if you have less than 10, but if you don't, it's good to like discuss it as a group at your institution or with whoever may be involved. And then I always like to add, because computer storage units may not be people may not understand like when they're filling it out, like, oh, computer storage unit. Is this just the files on the computer? Is this other things? Like, what does it mean? So you can add things like external hard drives. And jump drives, whatever you call them at your, or you can even have one for born digital records, and it covers them all. And then once you're done, you save them and they are available for you to use. And once I've completed this, I'll show you what it looks like when you're creating assessment record. So next section that you can add more checkboxes to is conservation issues. So we have the global one, and there's multiple types of possible preservation and conservation issues that you could have. And these are just the general ones. But I know when I was doing a lot of the scrapbook things, like with Jane Doe and other collections, I saw a lot of things glued, and there was a lot of glue and things. So I want to make sure I note that glue is a problem and that there may be other problems. Like I want to say paper clips, not just metal fasteners, because someone may not know what that means. Of course, there's always Google, but you want to be more specific so people know what to select because they're doing this quickly rather than having the time to actually sit there and do it over several months. It's really up to you. So again, you have the ability to add 10, and then you have no more, and if you notice that one's not being used, like you have no records associated with it, you can always delete and add another one that you want to use. So when you're in assessment attributes, before I go back to an assessment record, I want to show that when you see this magnifying glass, it gives you the ability to click on it. And when you do that, it opens a new tab. And whenever you click on the magnifying glass, it will show you the search results of whatever records have that rating associated with them. So if this one was reformatting readiness, we clicked on it and we see that the assessment number 1 has that rating associated with it. But if we click on things like interest, we see there's no records because we haven't had any assessments using that. So that helps you to determine if a new rating you added or type to see if it has records associated with it and if you can delete it or not. And same with material types and all that. You can click on these and see what assessments are associated with them. And we'll get into reports later on, which help you to actually get a listing of these and not just see search results. So that is what the magnifying glass next to the value means, and you can use it to just basically see all the linked assessments that are using those. So when we go back into our assessment records, we're going to edit this. We're going to scroll down to our ratings. And we now see that we have the ability to add a rating for donor priority and researcher interest. Unlike the ones above it, you don't have the question marks. It doesn't have a tooltip when you scroll over it because it's just associated with this repository and it's something that you added. So it's not an out-of-the-box one, so it doesn't come with what the ratings mean, which is why I suggest adding what the ratings mean in your manuals, your workflows, those procedures. So people, when they're filling it out, have that handy and know why they're rating this. So say this, now we know that the Jane Doe paper, its donors have decided that they will give us money to preserve and process it. So it's now like a 5 rating, and we know that we need to get this ready. We also know that people are now interested, and we have several researchers requesting it, so we can rate that based on our ratings. And that way, we have that. So let me do something. Okay, so we're gonna save this now. And now we have filled out the additional ratings, and we know we have this information. And now we can also fill out the material types and formats because we can add those additional ones. So we know that this has 16-inch records, and we want to make sure that's noted. We also found an external hard drive, and we want to make sure that's noted. And we can see that these are there and available to us, but if we need to add more, we can always click on the manage additional material types / formats for this repository. So if you have the permissions, that will always appear. If you don't have the permission, all you will see under this additional material types / formats are the ones that have been created. If there are none, you see that, but you won't see any under there, and you won't be able to edit them or add more. But if you were to click on this, let's stay on page and save it. If you were to click on this from inside the assessment record, it would take you into this, and then it will take you to that section of the assessment attributes, and you can add more to it, or you can delete them because it's not being used, that kind of thing. So you can do on the fly adding material types as you're creating assessments, but just remember you have a limited amount and you can't just add every single type of record that you have or type of material. And then we'll go to conservation issues, and we now see that we have the ability to say there's glue and that we have paper clips, and we can add more information about it if we need to and save the assessment. So now we've updated it with those additional information. So we have all that information there. And we have completed this assessment as best as to our ability. We've managed the assessment attributes, and now we can use it to, we can include it in our list of assessments and create reports and do all that fun stuff to determine, well, if we need to process it, if we have the resource and time to process our things in our backlog, what comes first, what can be we can wait on, that kind of thing. Like the workbook demonstrates, this is really up to you as an institution how you determine how you use assessments and even the attributes that you would use in terms of rating, conservation, and material types and formats. And I think I am done discussing managing assessments. So I will answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Brittany. Sounds good. Yeah, please feel free to go ahead and keep adding questions into the Q&A. We do have a few questions, so we'll go ahead and dive into those. So did the changes to the attributes get applied globally? No. So these are repository specific when you're adding additional types or ratings. So like Brittany's example of she has a lot of music at her archive, so she wants to make sure she includes different format types for audio materials within her repository. Those additional material types may not be as relevant for maybe like the rare books department that also has a repository in ArchivesSpace. So these are repository specific, if you look right there.
Yeah.
So that's one thing to keep in mind is if you do have multiple repositories within your implementation of ArchivesSpace, and maybe sometimes you transfer records, like maybe sometimes a collection comes in and it does get transferred to another repository. And when you transfer that resource record that has an assessment attached, if you do have any additional assessments that you have added within your repository, they will not transfer over. So that is something to keep in mind, that when you make customizations like this, you could potentially lose that if you transfer to a different repository. And it's another thing to sort of keep in mind because they are discoverable only in your repository. So for reporting and that sort of thing, if you have a lot of repositories and you want to look at all the assessments, you may want to consider using the global settings over the repository settings.
Yes, and just adding notes about things.
Yeah. So Jennifer, so global options can't be changed or hidden. We can only add. Yeah, and from the manage attributes, assessment attributes, you can only add additional fields. That doesn't say it isn't possible. You would just need maybe like a plugin or some other sort of customization to hide those fields.
Yeah.
Do the free text fields have a character limit? That's a good question. I don't know the answer. It's not something that's come up, so I would say you're probably pretty safe. Brittany, do you know?
I don't. It's not a field I've ever added a lot to, and you do have the external document ability to add an external document if you're wanting to add like complete reports or a lot of like pages of text. So yeah, no, I don't think so. The Help Center documentation may say something about it, so you may want to check there or just test it out.
Yeah, I think within notes, really you're fine. But like Brittany said, it may be more valuable to use like an external document or something if it's like a really massive report or piece of text.
Yeah.
If there's a new version of ArchivesSpace, could you lose your additional assessment attributes? No.
No.
Yeah, when you update ArchivesSpace, all of this, all of the changes that you've made to your data would transfer over. If you had the same custom material type in both repositories, would it transfer, or do all custom fields not transfer?
They don't transfer.
Yeah, they don't transfer.
You have to, if you have the same ones, you'll have to add them to assessment attributes in both repositories. So you would have to select the new repository, then go into manage assessment attributes and add that custom attribute.
Maybe I missed this, but can you edit the translation column under assessment attributes to be more specific about what a database value means? Like if you want to be more clear about what you mean by art originals.
That might be a controlled values list thing, but I don't think so. It might be a config or customization thing you can do.
Yeah, potentially you may want to post that to the listserv to see, but I would be wary of doing things like that, especially if you plan on like importing with CSV, and it might mess you up.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that about the global attributes? Removing one of the global attributes can be done with custom editing. Jennifer, I'm not sure. It may be something that could be done with like a plugin, like if you have someone at your institution that can create plugins or do that sort of customization within ArchivesSpace. But within the manage assessment attributes, you cannot.
Yeah.
Again, it'd be a great question for the listserv to see if other
Yes.
users have done it. All right. Not seeing any additional questions in the Q&A. If none pop up while I'm talking, we'll go ahead and move on to the second exercise, Brittany, if you're ready.
Yeah. Sounds good.
All right. Okay. There's a question, Sreed has a question about controlled values lists under the system menu. Managing assessment attributes is not under the system menu. It's under the gear menu for a repository.
Yeah. I and I don't think the ratings or anything like that are a controlled value list.
Right.
So, yeah.
All right. So if no other questions pop up, we'll go ahead and move into the exercise. So let's see, we're a little bit ahead of schedule now. So let's go ahead and start on exercise 2 and a break. We will, that's on page 27 of your workbook, and it's about editing and thinking about editing assessments. It has some questions for you to consider. It's really a good thought exercise. If you don't feel like working in your instance, you can at least read those questions and think about them, and maybe if you have any comments or questions, drop those into the Q&A. But let's go ahead and take 15 minutes for a break. And if you want to start the exercise, let's do that. And then let's say at 10 minutes after the hour, Brittany and I will come back and we'll start discussing. And then maybe do that for about 10 minutes. And then at 20 minutes after the hour, we'll start talking about importing. So if you have to step away for a minute, please try to come back at about 20 minutes after the hour. That's 2:20 my time, Eastern time. And we'll start talking about importing. But until then, please go ahead and start working on exercise 2. That's on page 27 of your workbook, or do whatever you need to do until then. We'll be back in just a little bit to talk. Thanks, everybody. All right, everyone. We are gonna spend the next 10 minutes or so discussing the exercise. If there are any questions about the exercise or anything like that, please feel free to go ahead and drop that into the Q&A now. We'll spend 10 minutes doing that before we move on to the final section of our agenda, which is importing. Brittany, for exercises 3 and 4, do you plan on doing those together as a group, or are we going to break off and do them?
I think we planned on doing those together.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just want to double check.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, but in the meantime, if there's any questions about exercise 2, or if you just want to say maybe how you did it or your logic behind it, please feel free. There's a lot of different ways to go about editing and managing assessments, and like I said earlier, most of them are not wrong. It's just about what's appropriate for your institution and applying it consistently. All right, we've got questions coming in the Q&A. Exciting. All right. Kelly asks, can you move assessments from an accession record to a resource record?
You can have the same assessment record linked to multiple records, different types of records. So if you have one for an accession record and that accession becomes a resource record, you can link that assessment to the new resource record. If I think that's the question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
So
can definitely.
you're just associating with that new record as well.
Yeah, assessments has sort of a one-to-many relationship with accession records and resource records. So you could maybe like a collection comes in and it actually comes in as three accessions, and you want to do one assessment for all three. You could do that, and that one assessment would link to all three, or maybe you want to do an individual assessment for all three and then link those to the resource record that becomes that collection later. You can do all of that. It's just about making sure you apply it in the same way, and it also it's just a thing to keep in mind. If you decide, like that first example, if you have three accessions come in and you decide to do one assessment to represent all three, and then you later realize that one of the accessions, those words are too close, too similar. One of the accessions is actually going to be deaccessioned, or one of them is going to be transferred or something like that. That will impact your assessment, and so you may want to do a new assessment, or it may be more beneficial, you find, to do individual assessments and to do new assessments every time something happens. So maybe you can move an assessment from an accession record to a resource record, but maybe actually it would be better to just make a whole new assessment now that you have a resource record, to indicate how the collection stands now that it's been processed, and then mark that old assessment that's attached to the accession record as inactive.
Yes.
A lot of different ways you could do assessments. Could you discuss the benefits of the various methods? Brittany, do you want to, maybe Brittany, could you talk about how you handled it at the AUC?
Yes, so at the AUC, like other institutions, we have a large backlog. And when a pandemic hits, you reevaluate some things.
Yeah.
We decided, since we had an inventory of all of our accessions, like we had inventoried our storage rooms. But they didn't have accession records. So we started creating accession records, and it's also made us think about assessing these records. So we decided that when we get new accessions, we needed to create assessments so we know the types of materials in it, the conditions of those materials, and it will help us, well, help them now. I'm no longer there, help them to determine the priority. Like, does this have AV materials? Is this something we can get a grant for? Is it something that needs to be preserved sooner rather than later? Is this a born digital collection that will need more work and that we don't have the time and resources for right now? So it's really at the AUC when I was there, it was used for accession records, but that's not the only record, right? But that's how we did it, and that's the termination was it was a part of our accessioning workflow. So after creating an accession record, after you've looked at this collection and rehoused it, you would create an assessment record and rate it and determine its conditions, its conservation issues, and the materials in it. And that way it's still fresh in your mind because you just worked on the accession record, you've worked on the collection, you know what's going on. You can create that assessment, then put the collection on the shelf, and when it's ready to be processed, we have that assessment and we know what's going on with the collection. If we're trying to decide the processing plan for the fiscal year, we have those assessment records. We can print that report and we can determine based on the accession records that we have in ArchivesSpace and our backlogged ones, which ones are priority. That was my whole thinking when creating the whole workflow.
Yeah, thanks, Brittany.
I
If
hope
anyone,
that helps.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if anyone else wants to drop into the chat, like how they manage assessments, and how they, if they use the assessment module, how they're using it now, please feel free to do so. One of the sort of bigger questions, and it sort of probably something that whenever I've talked about assessments with people before, I always want to point out is if you're using ArchivesSpace to manage assessments, it is possible to edit an assessment when something happens, like the condition changes. So you may say, oh, okay, well, we rehoused this thing. So now I can go into my assessments and change that, and say that now it's excellent. And you can do that, but think about what's lost there. So like some of the custodial history is lost. There's nothing wrong with that. If you just want to have one single assessment record that always reflects the most recent condition of the materials, that's totally fine. I would advocate for maybe having inactive assessment records and so that way you have a history of what's been done over time and by whom, or an assessment and by whom. And also just like if you ever think you might want to run a report, you want to make sure you don't mess with that sort of information. So that's the one question that we do ask during exercise 2 about like what is lost if you decide to edit an assessment. I always want to point out there's nothing wrong with doing it that way, but there definitely is something lost.
Yeah, and assessments are numbered, and so they're not named based on the records you're associating with. So you can always create as many assessments as you need.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, but other people feel free to drop in like the method that you use and why. It's a great starting off point, these exercises, but it definitely takes some consideration that you need to make at your institution. And if you're not the only person at your institution that will do this kind of work, you definitely need to talk to people to make sure you're on the same page. And like Brittany has said, document, document, document.
Yes.
Where in the assessment record would one record the information about what was done? Would it make sense to create a processing event? So assessments are about describing the physical content, so the condition of your physical content. It's not about recording action. So, right, if you an event record, if you wanted to record an event in ArchivesSpace for processing, that's one place that you could do that. But for assessments, you can say what needs to be done or who would be responsible for doing it. But if you're looking to track action or workflow, you could do that in the event module.
Yeah.
Molly asks, a little bit of a stretch, but I was curious if anyone had experience using assessments to assess description of the collection rather than the material in the collection. We're starting a reparative archival description project and are going to start surveying the description of our resource records, and I'm trying to decide the best way to track this. That is a really good question, Molly, and I don't necessarily have an answer.
I think that's a great idea, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it the workbook does say physical condition, but I think you can make it work for what you need it to work for in terms of the description. If you know that a collection has an outdated finding aid, you have the ability to checkbox the existing description in that area and then add ratings. There is the intellectual access rating, but you can also add the description data and all that. Is it historically inaccurate? Does it not have the right subject term? That kind of thing. So you can add those ratings to that area, but it is built for physical conditions.
Yeah. Vivian Lee says, it may not be what is originally intended, but I think this would be an awesome place to track this and you can run reports on it. Yeah, second what Brittany said, it's intended for assessing physical, and it would be a little bit of a stretch because the fields wouldn't necessarily relate. But Molly, I'm interested to learn more, especially if you decide to use assessments to do this. Please email me. I'm very interested in this. It's a good idea.
Yes, it might be another module to add to ArchiveSpace.
Yeah.
A feature request.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that I'm working on putting together not a training, but some sort of learning opportunity and discussion around reparative description in the next few months. So yeah, that's really like started me thinking. Thanks for the question. Mary says, I can see using assessments with archival objects within resource records versus accessions. I don't generally use the accessions as I like to contain or correspond archival records to resource records. It's wonderful that assessments can be used with archival objects as well. Yeah, that's a great point. And you know, a lot of institutions don't necessarily use accession records, but they do use resource records. So
Yeah.
that's a great use case.
I do want to point out that you can't add archival objects to accession records, just to point that out. They're only associated with resource records.
Right. Stacy says, I created a second assessment for the collection because I wanted to have the progress of the collection reflected. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way to do it. I mean, there's no right or wrong way. It's really up to you.
I know, but I think we're letting our opinions definitely show, though, Brittany.
I personally like this module, or I wouldn't be doing this training. So that can be on the recording.
I had previously added a couple of assessments for two of our accession records, and they seem to have mysteriously disappeared a couple weeks later. Could I have pushed the wrong button or checked the wrong box or something like that? It may be, I mean, you might want to ask your sysadmin to do a reindex or something, Eric. It's very unlikely that you deleted anything without knowing it. And with assessments, it gives you a warning before you delete it. It says, "Are you sure?" So it's unlikely it's gone. You might just need a reindex or something like that.
If you've gone through an upgrade since then, something may have gone wrong.
That's true.
Or, yeah. So definitely talk to whoever manages the implementation.
All right. Can you repeat what happens when you click inactive?
Yeah, so if you use the inactive, which I should just go ahead and share my screen. So if you use inactive, it means that this assessment is no longer, what's the word I'm looking for? It's no longer the assessment that is, it's no longer active. So inactive just means that this isn't the assessment that we're using. It doesn't actually describe the physical conditions as they are now, and you may have associated a different assessment with it. So it will remove it from reports and and it will remove it from searches. So if you search for the ratings that we have here, like if you go into the manage attributes and search for them, the inactive ones won't appear, that kind of thing. So inactive just allows you to keep it in your implementation and be able to find it when needed, but it won't appear when like search doing reports and kind of thing. But it allows you to see the history of creating assessments, especially if you've had multiple accessions or the collection has been reprocessed, that kind of thing. It's a way to not delete them, but not use the assessment. I hope that wasn't too confusing.
Thanks, Brittany. And I think that whenever you go over reports, it'll be a little more obvious, like why you might want to mark something as inactive.
Yes.
Can you have more than one assessment linked to an accession or resource record?
Yes. You can have it's a one-to-many. You can create have multiple assessments associated with one record or multiple records associated with one assessment. So here you're able to browse and link as many as you would like, and then you can go into and then you can go in and click create assessment with any of these types of records, and you can do that as many times as you like. So we can link this assessment to all these records. It's a good idea to link it to the same types, like multiple archival objects in the same collection, or similar this accession record for the same collection. So that way the information you're entering makes sense. So two different collections, that doesn't make sense. So that all those collections were not the same. And I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, thanks, Brittany. All right, we don't have any other questions in the Q&A, so let's go ahead and move on. For the remainder, for the last half hour that we're together, Brittany, like you may have heard us mention, we're going to talk about importing assessments, and we're going to talk about reporting in assessments for assessments. And there are exercises associated with that. They're in your workbook. But I think we're going to do them together, or Brittany's going to just walk us through them and show how to do them, and then you can try on your own later if you'd like, in the interest of time. But Brittany, if you want, I'll go ahead and turn things over to you for the last half hour.
So yeah, so we're going to discuss how to import assessment records, which you can do through a CSV file. And there is a template for this. It's there's a doc available in the Google Drive that is a template. It already has data, and that's what you would use to test. And then it's on the GitHub, and there's a link to it in I think your workbook as well. So unfortunately, for some reason, I cannot get Google Docs, like Google Sheets, to work for me, and the computer I'm on right now does not have Excel. But this is, let me see if I can zoom in. So it's a very large, well, a lot of columns in this CSV file, similar to if you were using the bulk import template, because it has like all the records you would need to, all those fields you would need to fill out or would like to fill out for your assessment. So it has the basic information like your record, the record that you are linking it to, and you can add multiple of those here. it has it where you can choose the existing descriptive information. So this is accession report, appraisal, container list, that kind of thing. I wish my Google Sheets was working, but it continues on and it goes through the basic, those assessment ratings, those types and formats, and the conservation issues, and it has those notes fields as well. I do have open here the overview. So this is available to you, and it goes and it's linked in the Help Center documentation, and it tells you what each field translates to, what area of the record it is, and what you can enter into that field. So the first part of the record is the basic information. So this is the existing type. You'll see that this is the record that you're linking it to. So it tells you how to link them. So it's an ArchivesSpace record in the form of record type plus separators. So / period space underscore plus that record ID. So let me go into ArchivesSpace. So if you were to go into this record, I can't remember the record. So it will include the ID and the type of record that you are linking it to, because assessments have to be linked to a record. It always has to be created, like I said before. So this explains to you how to format that in here. So the record ID, so what's in that identifier information. Just to correct me if that is not correct. And then you can see this example one. Oh yay, now I have the example. So you can see here that this one is an accession record and it's identified as number 2. And then as you go through the basic information, you can see you can add the surveyed by. So that is a user's ID. So this computer. So with the user, for the surveyed by, this is their username. So whatever your username is in ArchivesSpace, so it's not your full name here, it's your user name. And then all this other stuff goes over how to add that information, how to add the rating, how to do the format. So if Boolean and then various other things, and this is what it looks like. So if for ratings you enter a number, and this is just an overview, so it doesn't have everything, but it shows you what that means and how to do it. So and you can add notes as well. That is basically the overview of this, and if you have any questions about it, I'll gladly answer them if I can. I haven't really used the template that much. I tend to just create them in ArchivesSpace. But this way you can create multiple and just import them via the background jobs. Does anyone have any questions about the template before I move on to doing the actual exercise?
Yeah, thanks, Brittany. Yeah, the assessment CSV is a little bit, if you use the other import templates in ArchivesSpace, this one's a little bit different. I definitely recommend looking at the template overview that's included on the Google Doc. It explains things pretty well about how to use it. So the first couple times you use it, I would recommend referencing that Google Doc. I will say that if you are using ArchivesSpace version 3.2, which I know that most of you probably are not on the most current version, but if you have already updated, you can find the CSV template through the gear menu through the bulk import templates, and you can download it directly there. But if you don't have 3.2, or if you would like to be able to have access to that template overview, just hop into the Google Drive that we provided and grab it from there. Yeah. No questions in the chat. So if there are no other questions pop up, then feel free to go ahead.
Okay. So when doing the exercise, you would download this file, make sure it downloads as a CSV file. So we know that it will download as that. I already downloaded it. So you can download it from Google Drive or from the workbook. I believe it's in there. And then you will go into ArchivesSpace. You'll go to Create menu and you'll click on Background Job and you'll click Import Data. And from Import Type, you'll just choose the Assessment CSV. You'll click Add File. If you have one of those downloads that allows you to just drag and drop it, you can drag and drop files here. So we'll add the file from my downloads. And we'll open that. And then we'll start the job. This is like similar background jobs. It goes through the queue and then it runs the job. And then we just wait for it to finish running the job. Job has failed. Something is wrong. I'm not. It's quite possible those aren't in ArchivesSpace, or they should be.
Have you run this job before within this test
No.
instance?
No. Okay. Well, if it was to not fail, and hopefully it won't fail for you guys, I'm not sure why it's failing for me.
Regina says that it may be that the
You
user
would
that you
just
have in
be
the
able to
spreadsheet,
see.
the user might not be in this implementation.
Where is my user? It just sucks that I can't open this.
It says it was surveyed by Ginger, but Ginger isn't in this ArchivesSpace implementation.
No, she's not.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we need to update the import template. So, let's add Ginger. That's the easiest way to get this done. No. We're learning a lot today. Okay, let's see if that allows us to import. Choose the right one. Okay, let's see if it works for us. No? Okay, it will take too much time to troubleshoot this, but this is how you would import a assessment CSV. Sometimes background jobs fail. We all know this. I would say whenever you're testing this on your own, just go into this in Excel or Google Sheets and just make sure that it has maybe admin as a user and that the resource it's referring to is actually in resource or accession is in ArchivesSpace, because those are possibly the issues we're having right now.
It looks like there was another user.
About to like
There's a user Fred. Yeah.
Okay. So that's importing, and next we'll move on to reports unless there are questions.
Nope, no questions. Yeah, it looks like probably we just need to reconcile that spreadsheet has users that don't have users that have been created in this test instance. But I mean, Brittany, you know that's actually something we're working on currently is adding examples to the test instance. So that'll get solved. But it's good to see that like Normally, you can tell in an error message if you're not doing a live training and rushing through it, you can look at an error message and see what the issue is. There was also a
Oh,
question about where to find the instructions for this. So there is that template guide in the Google Doc or in the Google file, and then also your workbook is in your distribution packet. So there's instructions in the distribution packet as well.
yes. And then the help center has a
Yeah.
link, like the template, if you have access to it.
All right. So let's move on to reporting.
Cool. So, like with other records in ArchivesSpace, you can do reports. There are canned reports and custom reports. If we have time for custom, Jessica will go over how to create custom reports for assessments. So, for the canned reports for assessments, you would go down to background jobs from the create menu, and you would go to create reports. And in the out of the box archive space, there are two of them. There's the assessment rating and assessment record list. So we'll scroll down to those. And if there's more, I'm not sure of them. So assessment rating, that one allows you to see, show information for assessments with a specified rating and a specified range, so the 1 to 5. So whatever you select must have a value so it can show it. So you can scope by date if you choose, or you can uncheck that if you want all of them regardless of date. And let's say we want to get anything associated with reformatting readiness. We don't care about the value, we just want to have it. But you can change this to any of the ratings. It does include, if you're in the repository that has these custom ones, it does include those custom ratings that you have added, those additional ones that you added. And then you can check the values that you want. If you want 2, 3, 4, and 5, or if you want all of them, you can leave them unchecked. And then you can choose the type of file. So there's JSON, CSV, PDF, and then you would just start the job. Hopefully this one works for us. Something is going on. Okay. Let's see if I just check things. Jessica, I'm beginning to think this isn't me. Date range. Oh gosh. Okay. We will try this one more time. And then we'll move on to the next report. So when we're in assessment ratings, if you want to scope by date, you have to add a date to get the report. We'll see if we can just choose all of those. I know I chose. And you have to make sure the value has been used. If no value has been used, there we go. So make sure you choose the values. If you want all of them, check them. And then you can open it and it will give you all of them and show all the ones with that associated rating. We only have one in there, so it will give you information such as the note, if you wrote a note with it, the rating that it was, what records it's associated with, and who surveyed it, and the date it was started. That kind of information will appear in that one. The other one is the assessment record list, and this is all created assessment records. You can scope by date or choose to just have them all. Similar to this, you can do different format types similar to the others. And so this allows you to show all created assessments in a given year. So say you want to create a report for the fiscal year, you can do the dates here for that. If you want to do it for 5 years, that kind of thing, or just all of them that you've ever created. You can do that here. And that this report will show that information. And we'll go download report. We'll open it. And then it will tell you how many records were created during this given time period. We know it's just one. And it gives you a lot of information about this assessment. So it gives you it will give you the list of material types, the conservation issues, if you filled out any of those notes, and then the ratings and the notes associated with them. So it's almost the whole record, but it's not, and it's not really, it's not formatted like that, right? So, but it will give you that information, and so you have it in record form. You can add this to a control file, whatever you want to do with it. And then does anyone have any questions about the out of the box reports?
Yeah, I've started answering some of the questions just in the interest of time, typing some answers, but one of the questions was if you're doing an assessment report by date, would it be the date that you indicate is the start date or the conclusion or the end date for your assessment? It's gonna be by start date. And remember, you're only required to supply a start date. You do not have to supply an end date.
Yeah.
And then to clarify, any inactive assessments would not be included in these reports?
Correct. Yeah, inactive don't get included in reports. They're just maintained within your repository in your ArchivesSpace implementation.
It would be, I'm sure it is possible to create a custom report that would show all of your assessments, or maybe will give you that that information, but that would be a customization you'd have to make.
Yes.
So how would you report on assessments that you completed? So you could just mark with the completion date, the end date for the assessment. As long as you don't mark it as inactive, it's still there, whether you completed it or not.
Yeah. Because the out of the box report is about what was created. So it's about all created assessment records. It's not about all completed assessments. So that's why the survey begin date is that date, because it was created then.
I'll also say that within the new custom report functionality within ArchivesSpace, it's possible to run a report, an assess of all of your assessment records and get a list of inactive assessments. So maybe if you're like, oh, I wonder what all have been marked inactive, you can do that within custom reports.
Yes. They're just not in the out of the box reports, the inactive ones. Jessica, do you want to go over custom reports, or do we have more questions?
There's a question about how do you view a JSON report after it's downloaded. It should just download, and then you'll need to open it with like a reader.
Yeah, but that's why it gives you different options. Yeah. The format you download is totally up to you, but you have the options.
All right, but yeah, I can go ahead and share my screen if you want, Brittany, and really quickly talk about custom reports. All right. All right, so there's a question in the chat that doesn't seem, it's not related to assessment, so I'm not going to answer it, but Brittany, maybe if you want to type an answer to that while I am sharing my screen. All right, everyone should be seeing ArchivesSpace. So I think that most of you know that as of ArchivesSpace version 3.2, you now have custom report functionality within ArchivesSpace. I'm going to go over this really quickly. and I'm not going to run any reports or anything. I just want to point out that this is possible. So you keep in mind, if you're using your test instance, you do have access to this. And if you're using the sandbox, you also have access to this. But if you are using a version of ArchivesSpace that is older than 3.2, then you're not going to be able to see this at your own institution. But to access the custom reporting feature within ArchivesSpace, you just go down to the gear menu and select custom report templates, or create background jobs, and then you go to create report, which is where you can find all of the canned reports that Brittany was just at, but you can just select custom report here and it'll drop you down to the ability to create a custom report, and you hit select. Either way, you're going to land on this page where you would have a new background job with a custom report. And here you'll be able to access all of the custom report templates you have already created. So when you get to the background job page, you cannot, you need to have already created your custom report template to run the report. You can, and if you get here and you think, oh no, I haven't created it yet, then just go to create template. So again, you can either get there through the gear menu or the create menu, but this is what a custom report template looks like. You're required to give it a name, and then you can call it, call it something specific that makes it clear what it is. This is not a good name for a report. Do not call your report this, but for this, I'm going to call it that. If you want to have a description of this report or why you might want to use this report, you can indicate that here. You can also set a limit for how many results you want. I will mention that this custom report feature is only available to people who have the specific custom reports permission. So anyone can run a custom report template that's been created, but you would need the permission that it allows you to create and manage and delete these templates to get here. If you do not have that permission, then when you go to the gear menu, it won't even be an option for you to create a custom report template. That's not going to be on your dropdown. And that's because this is actually a really robust and powerful tool, or it can be, and you can crash your ArchivesSpace implementation if not approached appropriately. So, and part of that is because of how many results you could potentially get. So think about that when you're setting your limits for your custom reports. Just because you can have 50,000 results doesn't mean you need 50,000 results, especially if you're running a report that may be specifically looking for linked records and that sort of thing. You can exhaust your ArchivesSpace, and then you'll have to email your sysadmin and fix it. So I'm just going to leave it at 100 because there's not that many in this database anyway. And then you can run reports based on record type. So you could run an accession report, and then let's say I want to know all of my accessions that have assessments attached. You could do that by going down here to linked records, and basically you could run a report about every accession record that has these different types of linked records. So again, these are all those record types that we mentioned earlier that are additive, in addition to resources and anything that you can link together. This is where you could also break your ArchivesSpace implementation, because if you have you're trying to run a report on accession records and you always spawn your resource records from accession records, so they're always linked together, and you try to find linked records between the two, you could have a whole lot of results and a whole lot of complication. So just keep that in mind. But that is one way, if you want to know every accession record, every resource record, every digital object record that has an assessment attached, you can just do that by selecting Accession, Archival Object, Digital Object Component, Resource Record, and then going down to your linked records and selecting assessments. There's a lot more you can do here. Look in the user manual, look at that sort of thing, or look in the Help Center documentation, look in notes. We had an open call about this recently, but that's one way that you can get to assessment information about different record types. You can also create custom reports about assessments themselves. So that would then open up all of the basic information fields, and you can narrow by those, as well as all of those linked record types again. So you can look at, maybe you want accession records that are just you want to see all of their specific formats, or you want to, again, see what's linked to all of my resources, all of my sessions, all of my digital objects. This could potentially be a huge report. Again, keep that in mind. So there's a lot that you can do here and a lot of ways that you can customize this that you cannot do with the canned reports. It's not a one-stop shop. It's not going to be able to do everything that you want it to do, but it's definitely worth exploring and playing around with. I'll show you that one custom report that I've created. I'll go to my custom report templates. I created a report that it's specifically looking at assessments. I want to see all of my assessments where I had an appraisal, so I had a value attached. So the way I configured this report, super easy. I just named it assessments containing appraisals, eliminated it to 100 with a record type of assessments. And then I said, I want to know what has a value of yes, meaning it has an appraisal that has been done to it. And that's it. Then I can save that template and then I can run it as a background job and it will show me all of my assessments that contain appraisal. So that might be, some useful information that maybe your like administrator or something needs, and you can get that to them that way. It just allows you to drill down a little bit more into the records and get reports or get information out of assessments in a different way, and really all the record types in ArchivesSpace. But again, it's not like perfect in that it's not going to necessarily give you everything you need to know or give you exactly the information you need to know. It might give you, it might be a good starting point. Like it'll give you a nice dump of data that you can then massage and manipulate as a spreadsheet or something like that. But you can run reports against assessments as a record type or as a linked record type for accession records, resource records, and digital object records. So that's something that's new as of version 3.2. Can you select specific records, not type of record you want to get a list of assessments for? No, so custom reporting, you're reporting specifically on record types. You cannot run a report on a specific record. So that would be something, that would be a limitation of custom reports, and you could potentially, do a custom report in-house that you can add to ArchivesSpace that way. Any other questions about custom reports? We are like, we have 3 minutes. Any other questions about assessments? Let's go ahead and say that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Brittany, anything that you would like to add? I know that was a really fast look at a new feature, custom reporting, but I wanted to point out that it is possible to get assessment data out in different ways. So please feel free to play around with that and test it out. But like I said, be reasonable and be gentle and try not to break your archive space, which I guess is a good rule for everything.
Yes. Don't break it.
All right.
Yeah, thank you all for attending.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. This was, like I said, it was the first time we've ever offered this particular workshop virtually. So thank you for your patience, and thank you to Brittany for being willing to lead it. As always, an excellent job. I'm always happy and learn something new whenever Brittany is our trainer. If you have the time, again, please do complete that workshop survey that's included in your agenda. That will help the Trainers Corps as we move forward and trying to figure out what sort of trainings we want to offer again in the future. But in the meantime, yeah, thank you for attending, and I look forward to seeing all of you at the next ArchivesSpace event. Thanks, everybody.